Day, her teachers gave the students a simple prompt, and it was, if I were president, I would, ... And then they hung them in the walls of her preschool, so all the parents could see them when they came to pick up the students. And a lot of her fellow classmates had answers that you would typically see. If I were president, I would make recess all day. If I were president, I would eat candy for breakfast. If I was president, I would make the national pet a cat. And then you got to my daughters, which was, if I were president, I would be my mom's boss. Yeah, and I thought for a second, and I went, okay, how do I want to interpret this? One, it goes to show that my daughter knows that I work for a president, not the president, but a president. So anything presidential, she assumes it has to do with my job. So when I picked her up from school that day, I decided to ask her about her prompt. And I said, Emma, I read your prompt today. If you were president, you would be mommy's boss. And she said, mm-hmm. And I said, well, why did you choose that as your answer? And she said, because then I get to make all the decisions. And as an educator, I also took that as a teachable moment. And I said, that's right, you would be mommy's boss. The president, highest office in the land, does get to make all the decisions for our country, with some help from others. But also, mommy would still be your boss. And she got very puzzled. She's like, what? No, I'm the president. I said, I recognize that. But the president, as all elected officials, actually serve its citizens. And so you would be held accountable still to your mom. And she got a little sad. But after that, I started to think, what would that look like? What would it look like if tomorrow we woke up and my fierce 5-year-old daughter assumed the highest office in the land? And then I was filled with a feeling that I have almost every time we put on a program like this or I have an interaction with any of the students that we work with over the years. And that is hope. I am very excited and hopeful for our future because I get to have interactions with those like you in the audience, those who choose to come here at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Many of you who are juggling different schedules, who were here last night or also doing social engagements and coming here in the morning to make it a priority for you to sharpen your leadership skills. For me, when Shelby asked last night, what is our intention? What do we stand for? Where do we want to see that impact? I know that I want to make impact by serving future generations, and I get to do that every day in my job here. And in doing so, it's a privilege to serve the youth of America. It's a privilege to serve you and help you get to the greater heights that I know that all of you are going to achieve. I find it a privilege that I get to work with dynamic students every day. And in doing so, we here at the Reagan Foundation, we create space to bring all of you together so that way you can interact, make a network, so that way you have your tribe moving forward. And one day, I'm going to be really excited when I again get to cast a ballot for one of you that are sitting here in the office. Whether you're running for a local office, which one of our advisory committees is. I'm giving a shout out to Connor, who is on a ballot this fall. So if you're in Ventura County, vote for Connor. Or if you're going for congressman, congresswoman, senator, or even the highest appointment in the land as president. I look forward to that day. The future is incredibly bright, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce another shining beacon of our future, Nuha Zabab, who oversaw our advisory committee this year. Nuha.
Thank you, Rebecca, and hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Trust me, I know how hard it is to wake up this early on any morning, let alone a Saturday morning, but you made the decision to be here, and that's important, and I hope you're as excited as I am. My name is Nuha Zabab, and I'm a student just like you. I'm a 4th year at Georgia Tech, or as our program calls it, the Georgia Institute of University. I think I like that better. And it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Reagan Foundation to the 2nd annual Reagan Leadership Summit. And you've heard yesterday and today, you must have noticed that our theme this year is Uniting the Divide. And I don't know about you, but I couldn't think of a more appropriate time to have this discussion, especially when anytime you turn on the news or you're scrolling through social media, you see politicians and civilians alike ripping each other apart based on a policy they subscribe to or a race and religion that they identify with. And anytime I see this, I'm constantly reminded of a quote by Paulo Coelho, who says that the world is changed by your example, not by your opinions. So you want positive changes, you start with positive actions. And President Ronald Reagan was a firm believer in this concept, this idea of personal diplomacy, of building bridges rather than burning them, and of having a face-to-face discussion with those he was seeking to persuade. And that's why, as we heard yesterday from Shelby, after he became president, in the middle of Cold War tensions, he often spoke about his desire to have a one-on-one sit-down with the leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. He felt that this would help alleviate any fears of the United States' intentions and in turn promote peace. And while Ronald Reagan stood firm in his opposition to communist expansion and imperialism, it was his relationship with Gorbachev and his personal diplomacy that were major factors in what ultimately led to the end of the Cold War. They were on opposite sides of their political beliefs, yet in 2004, Gorbachev was quoted calling Reagan an honest rival and a friend. That's powerful. You see, President Reagan exemplified our theme of uniting the divide. He proved that we can do better than vilifying our neighbors and plotting their demise. We can suspend our own beliefs long enough to understand and value one another. And that's what leads to actual progress and collaboration. And you know what? I can already see that we're accomplishing that in this room. The diversity speaks for itself. You guys look beautiful. And I spoke to many of you guys yesterday. We're sitting here united from every corner of this nation. And that many of you have traveled long distances to be here serves as a reminder to us all of just how important this work is. Rebecca spoke about how the Reagan Presidential Foundation is committed to developing the next generation of civic leaders. And as a past intern, I can promise you that they don't take that lightly. And you guys, you've earned the scholarships, you've been here on the field trips and the programs, so you already know that. And it's because our generation's influence is at its strongest. As a fellow youth, I have so much faith in us and in you. The fact that you're sitting in front of me today means that you do care and you are a leader. And I'm not going to tell you that you're the future. You are, but you're also the present forces of change. You may be the future educators or lawyers or presidents sitting in this room, but you don't get to become the best of those without what you're doing right here, without noticing problems and doing what you can to find solutions. My personal goal is that each of you leave this evening feeling rejuvenated, inspired, and prepared to build bridges across our nation. And that's my promise to you and the Reagan Foundation's promise to you. But I must ask for something in return. Many of you came in today with a peers from school or a friend, and before you leave this evening, it would be a disservice to yourself if you didn't meet or speak to someone different, someone with different beliefs and ideologies, a different race than you, a different faith than you. And finally, make a commitment to yourself to stand for nothing but excellence in everything you do, especially in the way that you present yourself in person and online. Don't be afraid of having civilized conversations, because the future of our country depends on it. And now, before I get out of the way and let some more interesting folks take over, I just want to really thank each of you for being here, and I hope that you enjoy and take in everything this day has to offer. Thank you so much, and welcome.
Next up is our keynote speaker this morning, Cole Scanlon. He's the co-founder and co-director of the Fair Opportunity Project, which is an ed tech nonprofit that distributes free college applications and financial aid information to 64,000 public high schools each year. For this work, he was inducted into Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2017. He also has work experiences at Google, Goldman Sachs, and the World Bank, and he currently serves as the co-director of Harvard's Lab for Entrepreneurship and Development. He's the son of a high school English teacher and grew up in Miami, Florida with 4 siblings. He graduated from Harvard College with a BA in applied math and is a current graduate student studying social policy at Oxford University. Please join me in welcoming Cole to the stage.
Barrett, thank you very much for the kind introduction. So again, my name's Cole, and I'm really excited to be here. Firstly, just want to thank the Reagan Foundation for inviting me to come speak. It's been about a little over 4 years since I was last here. I was here as a G. Reagan Scholar, and I came here for the first time as a high school senior, and remember appreciating the beautiful view from the library and enjoying the weekend meeting a lot of peers, so I hope you're all enjoying it as well. Now, like all of you, I'm a student. I just graduated from college in May and started graduate school. So I don't think that gives me much, I guess, of a head start of additional experiences to share. So I really wanted to take this moment to reflect on our shared experiences growing up at a particular time in the country and connect those to the theme of the conference. Now, I was always that student in class, in algebra, in English class. Whenever I was presented with something, I would ask, oh, how does this apply to my life? And how can I use this? I'm sure many of you are like that as well. You want to know, what can I get out of this, and how can I apply it? And that's what I hope to do today. I hope to ground everything I say in what we can do as individuals. That was something I've appreciated about the remarks thus far. It's focused a lot on personal agency and what we can do as individuals to take responsibility to unite that divide and grapple with these difficult questions. Now, uniting the divide, the theme of the conference, it is quite daunting. I loved Tony's remarks yesterday in how to approach that question, thinking like historically, what can the past teach us in terms of us being in a position that's somewhat similar to this in the past, experiencing a moment in time when the country seemed divided. And I think at the very least, that can provide a little bit of reassurance in terms of our ability to get through it, and also provide some lessons into how we can get through it. I loved Shelby's remarks on civility and empathy, and how sort of our personal character can play a critical role in us bridging that divide. What I like to do when faced with difficult questions like this is think about things at a really small scale. And when I was thinking about this question, uniting the divide, the first thing that came to mind is lemonade stands. And I'll explain. So I grew up in South Florida, as Barrett mentioned, and I grew up with my 4 siblings, and during elementary school, there was a period of time when in the summer, we all are gifted to have those long 3-month summers, and we'd get up early on a Saturday morning and host a lemonade stand outside our house. I'm sure many of you have done that, maybe selling Girl Scout cookies or just had an entrepreneurial spirit at a young age, and anyone studying economics or anyone who's familiar with economics would be proud to know that we specialize quite quickly. My older sister, she's about a year older than me, she was sort of the chief financial officer. She would manage the money, she would make sure customers got their correct change, and make sure that sort of the ship ran smoothly. My job, I was about 8, 9 years old at the time, I was logistics. I would carry these big Gatorade coolers from the kitchen filled with pink lemonade powder, water, and ice out to the street to make sure we never ran out of lemonade. I have 2 younger brothers. They're about a year and 2 years younger, and they were like the mad scientists in the kitchen, I guess you could say. They were dealing with these huge Gatorade coolers, mixing the powder, using, I guess we were running out of wooden spoons, so they would use spatulas and all of these different utensils, and sort of emerge to see how business is going with pink dye all over their hands. I hope they weren't dipping their hands in the pink lemonade, but I assume it was just because they were mixing it up. And actually, just a side note, one thing I'm curious to talk about later is whether that would be considered homemade lemonade. We got in a bit of a discussion about that when we were writing our sign. Like, we just used the powder and water and ice. I mean, are we being a little deceitful? But I'm pretty sure we said it was homemade. So, and then my youngest sister, she was probably 5 years old at the time. I would say she had the most important job, which was serving the lemonade and giving it to the customer with a smile. Now, I bring up this moment because although we got along pretty often, I always appreciated how smoothly things ran when we were working on this lemonade stand. How any fights from the night before or that morning dissipated as we were working together towards this common goal of making some money and then quite promptly spend it at a nearby bakery. So this isn't a talk on how to manage your money. We probably should have saved some of it. But there was this sense of like unity, camaraderie, and things just moved pretty smoothly. And I don't think this is a particularly revolutionary point to make, that common goals bring people together. I'm sure if you reflect on your own experiences in your extracurriculars, your sports teams, your music groups, think about the ways in which pursuing a district championship would bring people together. And in a way, you even sacrifice your individual preferences and wants for the common good. You're all working towards the same thing. And I think problems can do that as well, common problems. Thinking back with my siblings, anytime we'd get a Frisbee stuck on the roof or discover a stray cat, people would drop their homework and pretty quickly someone would get the ladder, someone would get the stick, or with the stray cat, everyone would sort of mobilize to figure out how to solve this problem. And I think also what's cool about this example, thinking at a very small scale in your schools, in your families, is that as you expand the scale a bit larger, sort of the same dynamics apply. I remember one of the most impactful experiences of my early adulthood was starting a charity 5K run with some friends. We organized a group together, and again, it was a Saturday morning, and we hosted a 5K. And I remember just stepping back on that day and appreciating how competing supermarkets donated food, different cultural clubs were all there, trading traditional foods that were donated, even rival high schools. So players that might, the weekend after, play against each other on a football field or a soccer field or a basketball court, were running alongside each other and volunteering. It was a really special moment, and I think something that we don't appreciate enough. Now, for the history buffs and people who are interested in government as well, there are numerous examples, right? You think about political campaigns, people working together towards this common goal. For a country in wartime, that's a great example of people sacrificing their personal wants and personal pursuits for the greater good of the country. Or even a coalition of countries working, I guess it's very fitting since we're in the Reagan Library, working towards addressing the common threat of communism. Now, I think this sort of unity that results from people addressing a common goal or a common problem is quite inspiring, and it brings out the best parts of humans in many ways. Their ability to empathize with other people, bridge those divides. But there is a bit of a troubling trend in America that's challenging our ability to do so. And I think it's a little easy for us to lose perspective of this just because we have only been in this country for maybe 2 decades. But there's a shift towards social isolation. And I'm not referring to the case in which maybe on a Friday after a long day of school, you coop up in your room and you're on social media or watching Netflix or something like that. I mean, that is social isolation, but I'm referring to the case in which we increasingly are less involved in our communities. And in addition to that, the communities that we do operate in are more and more homogeneous. They're more and more similar to ourselves across a range of characteristics. What the people around us look like, what they believe, what they do as a job. And it's troubling because there are many implications of that. It makes it more difficult to empathize with people different from us. It makes stereotyping more likely. And I just generally think it takes away from sort of the richness of our country. But on all this, I am quite hopeful, and I'm particularly hopeful at our ability to address this. But a lot of it really does come down to this sort of personal agency piece. Oh, and when I think about our ability to fight against this social isolationism, a lot of it comes down, I think of it really in 3 progressive steps. Where the first, I think this is a great example of it, is just sharing space with people that are quite different from us. And it's harder to do. In the past, there were a lot more areas in the country in which a mixing of people was more likely. This is and don't just trust me on this, this is well documented by social scientists. One of my favorites is Robert Putnam, who's done a lot of work looking at the ways in which we're less involved in our communities, and our communities are more and more like us. So when I bring up this example of shared space, I think this is an excellent example of that. My favorite example actually was given by a political philosopher named Michael Sandel. He has this book called What Money Can't Buy. And he's talking about the ways in which applying a market economy to our country and different areas of it has detrimental effects broadly. But he gives this one vivid example of the New York City subway system. And if you haven't been to New York and haven't been on the subway, just picture this true mixing of people from different jobs, different ethnicities, different boroughs of New York. And it really is, it's quite humanizing. I think part of the reason why is because it's not necessarily more efficient to pay for an Uber in New York. The subway's quite fast. So it means you have hedge fund managers with people who are homeless, with people from all these different boroughs. And I think there is some really inherent value to that. I mean, no one likes being delayed in their commute, but there's something humanizing about a range of people all experiencing it together. College, high school, I think are also excellent mediums for that sort of shared space. I remember during college, actually, 2 of my most rewarding activities, and they were political activities, is I interned for a liberal congresswoman, and then I participated in numerous conservative think tank programs. And it was incredible, just the act of being in that space, being active and choosing to go, was incredibly rewarding. Another example of this, of course, is traveling. If anyone's traveled to other countries and have really sort of immersed themselves in that new country, you experience the ways in which just being around people that are different from yourself can have immense value. So if the first step is one of sort of proximity, thinking about the ways in which we can take the active step and being in more shared spaces with people different from us, I guess the second would be one of activity. The ways in which we might engage in that environment. I guess going back to the New York City subway example, think about everyone on the subway putting their headphones in and just trying not to touch anyone else. That's sometimes how it is in these sort of shared spaces. We try and stick with our tribe. I love what Shelby set up, this like system of the tribes and you meeting not only people in your own tribe, but also other people. And it's becoming increasingly rare, so I think that's an incredible thing. So the second step is one sort of engagement, taking personal agency to, go up to that person and introduce yourself and get to know someone quite different from yourself. I think it's an incredible thing. And then the third would be one sort of mindset. And that's a critical piece too, because I've been there before where let's say you're having a little bit of a weighty discussion about, let's say it's a political issue, or let's say it's a political issue, and someone's giving you their opinion on it, and it's quite different from your own, you just suddenly sort of like turn off. And you just sort of, your eyes glaze over and you don't really engage and you're not receptive to what they're saying. I'm sure that also happens in parenting a little bit. If your parent says, oh, you can't go to this party or this friend's house because, you kind of just turn off because you're like, okay, I don't even want to hear this. My point here is just like that mindset, the way you approach that conversation is critical. The way you approach it with like a curiosity and a desire to understand. I mean, the returns to that are incredible, and the impact it can have is incredible. So with all of this, I guess my ask is, firstly, looking at how things are going, looking at the ways in which common problems, common goals can bring people together, looking at the ways in which, in our country, we're increasingly operating in these pretty siloed bubbles. I'm excited for the closing keynote discussing sort of the echo chambers, the ways in which we're in sort of ideological bubbles in terms of the information we're receiving and the implications of that. But it's broader than that too. We're operating in bubbles of, living in, working in, going to school in these communities that are increasingly, they increasingly look like us and think like us, which has problems. And then finally, my ask really is one of personal agency and the ways in which we can take responsibility to, in many ways, acting out against those trends. I think it's a little bit harder because it's not like if we go to a sports game or we go to you go to your high school, it's necessarily going to be very different from you. You're going to get an experience of meeting people from a range of backgrounds. But that's even more reason to take the step and immerse yourself and engage. And I think, of course, that has implications for ourselves. It makes life more rich, and it also just increases your ability to empathize and understand other people. Your ability also to unify people behind a common goal, a common vision, a shared vision. In addition to that, I think it's just good for our society and our country. One in which our generation is defined by understanding and empathy. Even if we do disagree, just an openness to understand is critical. So what I'm most excited about is making this a bit of a discussion. So Barrett's going to come up in a second, and we're going to do a little bit of Q&A, and then also you guys all think if there's anything you want to discuss. I know we have the afternoon as well. But again, thank you so much for having me here, and I'm excited I've met some of you, but I'm excited to meet more of you. So thank you.
So like Cole said, I think we'll go ahead and start with Q&A. And I know we're both Reagan scholars, but we hadn't met before this weekend. So I just want to take a moment and thank the Reagan Foundation for, one, making this connection, but two, giving us the opportunity to all be here in the room today. But I'm sure everyone was paying attention, but just in case some people weren't, since it's still before 9 a.m., if you could kind of summarize in one or two sentences, what's a takeaway that you hope everybody walks away with today?
I think the biggest thing deals with like curiosity, being excited to learn different perspectives. I bring up the example with my siblings not only to give this example of the lemonade stand in which we're sort of unified, but my siblings and I were all, it's five of us total, and we're all extremely different. So my older sister, she's farming out in Oregon now. My younger sister's really into like the horoscopes and the chakras and the crystals. And there were certainly moments growing up when we'd discuss, topics of spirituality of crystals, or I'd have different political ideologies, or even just at a basic level, different goals for the future. But I always noticed that it was so much more rewarding to approach those conversations with a curiosity. So I guess my biggest takeaway is be curious, like hold on to that, and then actively engage, and really take responsibility for uniting that divide for yourself. Like we could present in the statistics that political polarization is at by many measures, its highest levels. One statistic I saw too was that trust in government is at around 10% right now, when in like late 1960s, it was at 70%. Like that's really troubling. And it can be daunting and overwhelming. But my ask is, it goes to Shelby's point, showing the Gandhi quote, think first about yourself and make sure that you're resolving that divide, and then that will spread out and it will increase your ability to unite people behind a common vision.
Okay, so you mentioned curiosity. So in your bio, you talk about the Fair Opportunity Project. Could you expand on how we could get involved and a little bit more about that mission?
Yeah, sure thing. So Fair Opportunity Project, as the name suggests, it really did start out just as a project. I went to an urban public high school with one counselor to many students in our class, and there's just a general, I'm sure some of you I know are in high school, a lot of you, it's a really overwhelming, stressful, confusing time. I lucked out. My grandmother was a public high school counselor. My mom's a public high school teacher. So I had a baseline of knowledge about how to navigate this just through them being connected to the school system. But a lot of my peers didn't. And when I went to college, students would message me on Facebook and say, how do I study for the SAT for free? So I would send them, oh, check out Khan Academy. Or can you send me a list of scholarships? And I would send them along. So it was really simple. But I met a friend from Minnesota at Harvard. We did student government together. And we realized we were doing the same thing, and a lot of the same problems kept coming up. So we decided, oh, this seems to be a problem. Let's combine efforts, get a team together, and just put together a guide, right? Like a sort of how-to guide, easy to read, sort of by students, for students. And the legality of this, I think, is still a little questionable, but we scraped emails and mail merged it out to like 57, the first year was 57,000 public schools, and we're just like, all right, we're done with this, like, time to start. It was, for me, junior year. But then we kept getting emails from counselors, from superintendents, from principals, asking, can I pay for this to be translated into Spanish? Or can I pay for this period? And we didn't, like, it's all free, so we didn't accept money, but there were a lot of people who were, I guess, inspired by the effort and the mission, and it just grew by itself. And then we were like, okay, there's clearly a larger need for this than we expected, so we kept working on it. To go back to, and that was just the background. So the question on how to get involved, the first is just sharing it. It's really by students, for students, and the idea is there are a lot of information asymmetries and gaps around how to fill out financial aid forms, how to prepare for the process for free. I didn't even know there's a Common App for scholarships that's out there that's pretty convenient. So using that information and sharing it with other people, I think, is the key thing. And then it's very much crowdsourced. So if you see any resources that you find helpful, let us know and we'll add them to the guide. Any grammar errors, I'm sure there are some, let us know. So that's the main thing.
So when we were talking yesterday, you kind of talked about how college for you is kind of a risk-free environment, was a time to explore. So what advice do you have for even the middle school, high school, and some of the college students in the audience? I mean,
I think that's really important. And I would say middle school and high school is certainly similar in that it is a bit of a risk-free time. And the reason I bring that up is, especially once you finish college, or even, let's say you're not going to college, and once you finish high school, you're really thrust into, I mean, the cliche is thrust into the real world, but in many ways, just the responsibilities you have increases. You have certain financial responsibilities, and you need to pay rent, and food costs money, and all of that stuff, you know? But when you're a student, you don't have to think about that stuff as much. And for instance, in college, you don't have to think about that stuff as much. So it's a great time to start a project, take initiative. And I remember actually a pivotal moment in high school for me is I decided my sophomore year I transferred to a new high school, didn't know the high school, and I was just like, oh, I'm gonna join the football team and run for student government. And before that, middle school, freshman year of high school, I was very like anti-involvement in school because I was like, I just wanna focus on my school, and outside of that, I'll just like do my own thing, you know, like hang out with friends, the whole deal. And then I made that decision to like engage and in a way like try something new, and it really did become a sort of snowball effect. So I think I encourage you to take that mindset wherever you are right now and think about, oh, what are the things I'm itching to do, and just do them, because yeah, like the risks are a lot less at this age.
So I think we're going to take some time to open up to the audience for questions. And so some people will be walking around with mics. So start to get your questions ready for Cole. Anyone want to be brave and start with the first question? I think we have one here in the back.
Hi. I think your FOP program is really great. I think a lot of first-generation students have trouble finding that type of information, so I think that's a great program. You talked a little bit about working for a left-leaning congressperson and also attending sort of right-leaning sort of events. Right. Can you expand on how that helped you in your development? And then can you also talk about if you still currently practice that and sort of understanding both sides? Right.
No, I think that's a great question, because I think politics now, and my knowledge of politics is a bit limited by what I've witnessed and what I've read thus far, but it seems especially moralized right now. And what I mean by that is it seems a bit of like a good versus evil, like people view maybe their party or their views as like the good side and the other side as the bad side. And I have a sense from what I've read and what I've learned, it didn't always used to be like that. There was a bit more of this sort of mutual understanding and a recognition of, to the points that I mentioned in the speech, like the common goals, the shared vision. So working for a liberal congresswoman and then going to numerous conservative think tank programs was incredible, because it made me recognize these common values, because I think we really do share so much more than we differ on. And these shared values in terms of wanting the next generation to have more opportunities than the current generation, or like parents just caring about the success of their children. Like a general humanism, I think underlies, a lot of political philosophies around what are the ways in which individuals can be elevated to their best selves? Like what are the conditions we can create politically to make that happen? So my biggest takeaway from being exposed to that was sort of an appreciation that we all have like good intent, especially anyone in like public service, in politics. Like I think it's wrong to consistently question people's intentions, and instead to understand where they're coming from, how they develop those thoughts, and then it becomes more of a conversation. I still try and engage in that way. So I'm going to subscribe to the newsletter for the closing keynote. That's one way I hope to engage multiple perspectives. But also, I think it goes down to the curiosity a bit too, like wanting to read books from a variety of perspectives, or wanting to read articles from a variety of news sources. So yeah, I encourage that, and I think it's a great question. Thanks.
Perfect. I think we have one here.
Hi. Are you able to talk about your work at Google and how that shaped your future?
Yeah, sure thing. So I did data science and marketing there last summer, and I did a little bit of work on their Google for Education team. And I think one of the experiences, or one of my takeaways from that impacted me the most, is being quite encouraged by the stuff that private companies are doing in the realm of sort of social impact. Like I remember being there, I was there during Hurricane Harvey, and I remember the day after, we had big team meetings, and everyone did a sort of brainstorming session in terms of what can the company do to address this, and address it given the comparative advantage that Google has. And I'm not making a sales pitch for Google or anything like that, but my point here is that we're all on the same team for a lot of these problems, right? Like the government wants anyone negatively affected by Hurricane Harvey to be helped. Businesses in the area want that as well. Just people who care about the well-being of this country want that. So my biggest takeaway was one, that I'm pretty inspired by what private companies are doing in the realm of social impact. The second was just the cool tech stuff they're doing, like trying the VR headsets or seeing the self-driving cars. I mean, it was just I didn't realize how far along things have gone, but I'm excited to see like when that stuff gets out in the mainstream. Thank you.
I think there was one more question here in this, perfect, right there.
Hi. So you talked about how having a common goal can be like a really unifying factor.
Yeah.
What do you think is like a common goal that Americans could rally around right now to like unite us and unify the divide?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. The thing I've been thinking a lot about is, and I'm a little biased on this, I think, because it might be my thesis for my master's, is on like social mobility. And I know there's been more and more work on this. And the idea of social mobility, in short, is just, I mean, sort of the ways in which, as a society, people from, let's say, low socioeconomic classes can rise up. It's sort of the Horatio Algiers story, let's say. And in many ways, it's an embodiment of the American dream, right? The sort of aspirational, doing better than your parents, like growth of the country, but also as individuals. And I think that's something, that's like a metric that a lot of people can rally around because it's so fundamental to the values of the country. So thinking about the ways in which, so the research side of it is this professor named Raj Chetty. He set up this lab, if you're interested, called Opportunity Insights. And they have some articles in the New York Times and really good maps that if you go on their website, you can type in your zip code and it gives you the social mobility in your area. So one example, the probability that if you were born into the bottom 20% of the income distribution, the probability that by the time, I think it's like you're 60, 65, you're in the top fifth, so the top 20%. And it varies so much. Some counties, it's like 6%, 7%. Other counties, it's near 14%. So I think that's a really important metric, and one I think any cases in which we see this area has a low social mobility, thinking about what can we do to just decrease that like friction, because I think there is something special about having an environment in which people have this equal baseline of opportunity and can sort of like aspire and feel like barriers aren't getting in the way of that.
I think sometimes, too, we feel like we have to all rally around the same cause, but I think each of us in this room can have a spark that gets us excited and we're passionate about. Yeah. So could you kind of describe how your spark started in ed tech, or how there was a moment in time at one point where you found out you were interested? Yeah,
and I like your mention of spark, because that's one thing I think a lot about is like what I'm really interested in, like what gets people's like eyes to light up or what gets their like blood flowing, and how that varies a ton. So yeah, I'd rally around social mobility, but I mean, there's so many different problems that a huge group can rally around. For me, I think my interest in ed tech naturally has some background in my family, just because we, at the dinner table, would talk a lot about, oh, this is what's going on with the teachers union now, or like this principal did this because my mom was a teacher. But I took a class my sophomore year at Harvard called Equity and Excellence in K-12 Education. And I think this was probably my favorite class. And it was, I think, an example of what a good class should look like, because it was a group of about 40 students from all over the country and really the world who had entirely different educational backgrounds. So some started in kindergarten in private school and have been in private school and prep school ever since. Others went to Montessori schools, which I didn't know much about, but it's where it's a different learning style where you're encouraged to do what, I mean, you might be counting with beads and they'd like encourage you to do that, even if you spend the whole day doing on that. I'm not doing it justice, but look into it if you're interested. It's a little different from the traditional education system. Public school students, charter school students, homeschool students, and I remember us just sitting around and having a discussion about these really important topics in education, like college access, or what is the role of religion in public education, or education funding. And it was cool because we were thinking about it from the academic side, thinking about what does the research show, but then also bringing in our own experience. And by having that diversity, it made it just a fuller picture. Because it's so easy, especially with education. I think people often have an opinion because we all have some involvement in it. We all went to school or are in school. So I like this idea of having a diversity of perspectives because you realize that, yeah, I mean, people had different paths and we're going through a different education system. So I think the spark for me was that class, which inspired me to start Fair Opportunity Project with my friend Luke, and then sort of been just running with it since, yeah.
And if you're sitting in the audience and you haven't found your spark, maybe you'll find it this weekend. So be on the lookout. Maybe you'll rally together with some other people and you guys can kind of carry that passion forward. But I think we had a question here in the front row. Nuha? Maybe they can just turn your mic on, I don't know.
Also just like,
yeah.
There you go. That's cool. Okay, sorry. I'm Nuha, and okay, my question, let me see if I can frame this correctly. So we've heard all weekend about uniting the divide, and you spoke about finding that like mutual respect and the underlying like humanism between all of our platforms, the different political beliefs. But I guess like one issue I find, I think like the biggest thing that we have an issue with is like balancing that mutual respect and the underlying humanism with like holding politicians and like people accountable for dangerous things, like dangerous like fear-mongering and racism and all of these phobias that can cause systematic abuses. So I don't know if you can speak on this, but like, I don't know, like what is your take on that? Like how do you balance that?
Right. Well, I think firstly, part of it is a result of the bubbles that have been formed in our country, in the sense that it's much easier to fearmonger, to stereotype, if you've, let's say, grown up in one community and went to school in that community and you worked in that community, and then now you're in Washington, D.C., a representative of that community. It's easy for you to pit that community against other communities, and I think that's quite common. So I think the first step, and that's why it's a great thing that we're all pretty young, is that we have this time, this critical time, to expose ourselves to different perspectives and actively, I mean, experience other places and get a sense for what different areas of the country are like. I mean, I'm certainly not a fan of fear-mongering or anything like that, but I think a lot of it has these sort of deep roots in how the country has been, the trends in the country, and we have a lot of individual responsibility to sort of fight against that. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Well, I hope you guys will join me in thanking Cole for coming out and speaking this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.